Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Saturday Conversation. I'm talking to you this morning from the Avon Valley Churches, a group of 7 churches surrounding the town of Woodinbridge on the edge of the New Forest. My name is Laura Cowdery. I help with digital support and communications at the Avon Valley Churches. And this morning, I'm so thrilled to be able to introduce you to a lovely lady, for those who haven't had the pleasure of already meeting her, Penelope Talfourd-Cook. Hi, Penelope, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you, Laura.
Brilliant. So I first met you, Penelope, at High Church, where we both worship, and then later on, we were both part of the Connect group that Heidi and Mike set up, which followed on from an Alpha course. And I was always so in awe and impressed with the amount of knowledge you have of the Bible and theology, and then later went on to discover your interesting faith journey. So I'd love to talk to you about that this morning, as well as the work that you do with children. So why don't you take me back to the beginning and tell me a little bit about where your faith journey began?
Okay, I'll try and do that. I'm glad you were impressed with my theology. I don't think it's very good at all. Well, basically, when I was little, my parents moved to Bicton when I was about 6. And we always used to go to Fordingbridge Church, just as a matter of course, really. We weren't really given a choice, my sister and I. It's what we did on a Sunday morning. We just got taken to church like we had a roast on Sundays, and I didn't give it any consideration. Church was very different then. We sat in the same pew. I think my mother wore a hat. She may kill me for saying that, I'm not sure. And my father read the lesson. We went back to the vicarage afterwards to have sherry. It was kind of different. And I never questioned it. I didn't sort of think about it. But looking back, I think that perhaps that was the foundation for my faith, because I think, although I was quite little, sometimes I was allowed to go into Sunday school with Janet Newman, which was much more fun. You'd rush around there rather than having to sit in a pew. But I think it did sort of sink in and definitely laid a foundation for me. Although I think in those days, my theology was even more muddled than it is now. Apparently, I was overheard one of the first times I was taken to church on the way out saying, I was rather shy shaking hands with God after shaking hands with the vicar. And then even louder saying, why does he wear a dress? So obviously it wasn't quite, I wasn't quite processing it, but there we go. But I think
very good questions.
Well, yes. And I think the music, I really enjoyed the music. That was a big part for me of going to church, and the soothing words, although obviously I probably didn't really know what they meant. And so it carried on from there. Then at school, we were taken to Salisbury Cathedral quite a lot and carried on singing sacred music, church music. I was very lucky. I was taught music by someone called Richard Shepherd, who's recently died, and he was very, very inspirational. He was a composer of church music. So that's been definitely part of my journey.
What school did you go to, Penelope?
I went to Godolphin in Salisbury, but then I went to Brockenhurst Sixth Form College after. So I stayed there for 5 years, and then changed to do my A-levels at Brockenhurst. And then I suppose I got slightly more sort of evangelical and discovered that church could be more fun when I was involved in a beach mission in Cornwall, run by St Paul's Church in Salisbury. And that was sort of something completely and utterly different for me.
Wow. What's a beach mission?
A beach mission, yes. We went and dug pews in the sand and marched around singing a lot. And there were lots of guitars and happy people and games and outside stuff. And I thought, gosh, this is completely different from what I've been used to. Mm-hmm. So I think that sort of gave me a different perspective. But in some ways, I've always felt all the way through, and even now, I'm an incredibly shabby Christian. I feel I admire people who have absolute steadfast faith carrying on and on and on. I really am in awe of that. I don't think it's easy to achieve, and it's certainly not easy for me to achieve. But having said that, my faith is always an anchor for me. It always pulls me back. No matter how far I drift away, something will pull me back again.
Absolutely.
And in fact, doing the Alpha course with you, which was, wonderful, I went because I thought, oh gosh, my faith's so weak, help, help, help. But through doing the Alpha course, actually it proved to me that it wasn't as weak as I thought it was. You know, almost sort of constantly overthinking, I suppose. But it, you know, it's something that grows and evolves. And where I am now, if I have doubts, I sort of think, well, what would it be like if somebody told me, no, you can't believe in God, I'm going to take your faith away from you? Well, I'd fight tooth and nail for it. So it must be there. You know, otherwise I wouldn't feel like that, really. And I don't know, just that sense of an anchor pulling me back all the time. Or, well, that sounds awful. That sounds like a chain around my neck, but it's not really like that. I think there's, is it Psalm 127 or something that says if you do things without God, it's all done in vain. And that does seem to be the case, that if you plod along on your own and try and do this and try and do that and try and achieve your, you know, aims that you have, that if it doesn't involve God, it tends to go a little bit wonky, I think.
Yes, I can totally relate to that. Yeah, that sometimes the voice is quieter, you turn it down, and then other times you tune into it when you really need to.
Yes. No, so that's absolutely true.
I completely agree with you. So what did you study at Brockenhurst, and what led you, because I know you went later on to pursue theology, didn't you? What did you study, and how did you go on to study theology?
Not through particularly good reasons, but so my A-levels were ones that you just had to write a lot for. So I did English, history and RS at Brockenhurst, which was fine. Lots and lots and lots and lots of writing. And then actually I wanted to go to Oxford, and I knew I wasn't clever enough to get in for English, which was probably my first love. So I decided I'd put theology through what we called UCA forms then, rather than UCAS, I think. Yeah. Sounds familiar. So old. And so I put it all the way through. Anyway, I was rejected by Oxford, and then went to Exeter and was planning to change from theology to English when I got there, which you could do fairly simply. But I got so interested. I got absolutely fascinated in it, and there's no way that I would have wanted to have changed. You know, it really drew me in, and they're all different aspects that we could study. Sometimes I think studying theology is quite a difficult thing because it challenges you enormously. You're pulling everything that you believe in apart, and you know, things that you thought were one thing, you're told, oh no, I don't know, for example, this saying came from a collective group of sayings from somewhere else, and it all becomes a bit soulless, I suppose. But if you can get through that and then stick it all back together again, then it makes enormous sense. But you have to sort of get over that hurdle,
yeah,
I think.
I remember you saying to me that there was one gentleman in particular who got to that point and just left because he couldn't put it all back together again because it was too
it's such
difficult.
A shame. Yes, it's a shame, isn't it, really? But no, that was how I ended up doing theology. But I mean, I still like reading about it, learning about it. I think, you know, it's never ending and fascinating. So I think I've developed a little bit from when I thought the vicar was God, but not much, probably.
Oh, that's so cute. So it's very much the soundtrack of your life, but you didn't decide to pursue it after you'd got your degree.
No.
What made you change your mind?
I never did it with an idea of being ordained, or pursuing it further, really. I sort of saw it, you know, for what it was, and I didn't really want to take that any further. I mean, I had always wanted to teach, and everything was geared towards that. So basically, I used to, when I was at Brockenhurst, have day release once a week to go and teach at Hyde School, which was, and then I went out to America and taught Montessori, and everything was geared towards teaching. So I may have wanted to have taught theology or RS or all the other names it's given now. There are lots of different initials in schools that it's given. But unfortunately, in my year off, I was bitten by an insect and, as you know, ended up very, very ill. It caused me to be paralysed from my chest down. And I was in hospital for 6 months.
I didn't know that was from an insect.
Yeah, it gave me 3 very unusual neurological diseases, which transverse myelitis, meningitis. Well, meningitis isn't that rare, and encephalitis all at once. So I didn't think I'd ever be able to teach after that, really. I didn't see that I could go forward with that plan, particularly. So after I finished my degree, I actually moved to London and worked in stockbroking, which probably isn't the most logical progression with a theology degree, but that's what suited my life then, and that's, you know, what I felt I wanted to do.
A complete change. So you came back from America, your life had completely changed,
yeah,
and you decided, okay, I'm going to go to London and do this a completely different career. How was that?
Well, basically, I came back from America before university because it was my year off. So I had effectively had to have 2 years off, and then, you know, sort of staggered through university, and then ended up in London doing that, which was an amazing experience, and university itself was an amazing experience. People, the friends I have made are, you know, just amazing. They just support me and sustain me, and it's just, you know, absolutely wonderful. But I can't say my heart was really in the stockbroking. It was not really me, but that then enabled me, when I left London, to get a job as an assistant bursar in a school in Sussex. And what I found there was that my room kept filling up with children, which it shouldn't have done, really. I found I really still had an affinity with children, and they didn't seem to mind that I was sort of, you know, wobbling around and whatever. They're very accepting, children. It's a real privilege to work with them. Everything's new to them. Everything's interesting. They don't mind particularly what they say or what they do. And that I felt I was sort of, I really enjoyed working in the school, but I thought, oh, I wish I was actually teaching these children rather than just them all coming and talking to me during the day, kind of thing.
Oh, that's lovely. I just want to go back a little bit, because during that really difficult time that you had, and then you sort of changed your career ideas, was that obviously it was a really dark time for you. Do you think that made you turn away a little bit from the idea of theology, or was your faith still very much the cornerstone, your anchor at that point in your life?
No. It's funny you should say that, because when I got very, very ill, I mean, I was only 19, so I was very young. It was absolutely terrifying. You know, it's not the sort of thing that you expect to happen. The odds of it happening are like millions to one. I never liked statistics after that. And I did lose my faith, really. Well, when I say lost it, almost lost it. You know, to start with, I think when I was literally at death's door, I was doing all that bargaining that apparently everybody does, like, oh, let me live and I'll do this. Yeah. You know, that's what people do, I think. You know, oh, I'll do anything. Then after that, I couldn't pray all the time that I was ill, all the 6 months I was in hospital. I just couldn't. You know, it was so dark and so frightening. But I knew that everybody else was praying for me, that I was being upheld by so many people praying. I even had one quite unusual incident when I was in hospital that I don't know if you remember John Davies, who was the vicar of Hyde. He may have been, no, he was before you were here, I think.
Before my time.
Yes, he brought in to see me the Bishop of Banatu, who was visiting. Not quite sure where Banatu is. You'd probably know better than me. Somewhere in Africa. Anyway, he was visiting and he brought him in, and at that time, the physios were having enormous difficulty getting me into any sort of standing position, because unless your gluteal muscles are working, you can't stand up. You just you double over and flop over. So in walked the rather splendid Bishop of Banatu and said, oh, well, you know, never mind, that's not a problem. And he blessed my buttocks. So then in the afternoon in the physio session, the physios were amazed to find there was a spark of life there, and managed to get me into some semblance of standing,
wow.
which was
so
quite
Holy Spirit was running through those hands.
Well, I think it must have been, but I think there must be a book there somewhere for me.
Absolutely, I love the title already.
Yeah, exactly. But so although I was failing miserably in my faith, other people weren't. My parents weren't. They were upholding, their faith and carrying me through all of this. But I couldn't really contribute much to it. But it built up again, as things got better. And that was, of course, before the theology degree and before all the fun of university and that sort of thing. But obviously something life-changing like that, I suppose perhaps you go one way or the other, and I kind of went the other.
But you still very much tuned back into that faith as you came out of that dark.
The anchor pulled me back again. Yes,
absolutely. Yes. So incredibly brave. What an amazing story. And so after the stockbroking, did you find that interesting? Was it boring?
No.
Tell me about that.
No, it was quite fun spending my earnings, but no.
It wasn't for you?
Yeah, no, it really wasn't. But it was fun living. It was fun living in London, and that to me felt like something I wanted to do because it was quite near to everything I'd sort of thought I wanted to do. So I went and did it anyway, if that makes sense.
Got it out of your system. I think I did the same. My year in London. I've done that. I can grow up now.
Yes.
Brilliant. And then you discovered when you were working as a bursar that you really loved working with children, and you do have a wonderful affinity with children. It's lovely to see. My son has a very special friendship with you. So did you retrain? And what made you tell me about the work that you do now and how you segued into doing that?
As I mentioned, originally everything was geared to me teaching, and then I decided I couldn't sort of cope with it. But one thing I did do was, when I was first out of hospital, Forest Sandal Manor in Fordingbridge had me to hear slow readers. I mean, I wasn't particularly well at this point, so it was quite a gentle little thing. But I realised I got very, very interested in how children learn to read and how they learn and how unique they all are. And obviously the ones I was seeing were the ones who were having some difficulties. And I really wanted to help them do this. And I thought, actually, this is really, really interesting, on a one-to-one, to be able to help them like this, because they're all unique. You can't pigeonhole them and say, oh, you're dyslexic, so you'll learn like you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And so that sparked an interest, really. But then, yes, as you say, the work in the school was fascinating for me, but I wanted to be more with the children and less with the figures and the money and everything. And then I had my own children shortly after that. So that, of course, is a very good learning curve for being able to deal with all children, having your own, and helping them through every different stage. And my children are both very different from each other. They both learned in incredibly different ways. They both have very different outlooks on life. By the age of 8, my daughter was saying, I want to be a lawyer. By the age of 8, my son was saying, I want to be a snowman. And, they're just completely different outlooks. And so I think that's helped me cement some of my ideas, whether they're right or wrong, on children and how they should be communicated with and talked to and everything else. And then moving here, I needed to work, and I thought, well, what am I good at? So I was 40 by that stage, so coming back to teaching quite late, really. And I retrained, and I retrained with Dyslexia Action, and started off just learning about literacy skills and all the development. And it was actually quite, really enjoyed learning again. It was a real, sort of privilege to be able to get back in the books and to find the time to do that, although quite difficult. And then I started tutoring children, and then eventually went into Camford and started working in support for learning there, which was brilliant. and then also decided that I wanted to assess children to find out what was really going on with them, whether they have dyslexia, or whether they don't have dyslexia, whether they have something completely different. There are all sorts of different specific learning difficulties, which now are quite often called specific learning differences, which is quite nice, you know, neurodiversity. And it is a fascinating field. I mean, dyslexia used to be called a middle-class fallacy at one point. That it didn't exist. But now we've got the advantage of the most amazing MRI imaging techniques and things like that. So you can see that, you know, people with neurological differences or neurodiversity or, you know, dyslexia or whatever, or dyspraxia or whatever is going on, you can see that the brains really are different. They really are physically working in a different way. Which I think is a huge step forward when, you know, the science of it can all come together to help the children to develop.
Absolutely. I was just talking about what you were saying with the difference between your daughter and your son. I think that's, in a way, that's what made me not realise what was going on with my son, because there's girls and boys are different, and a lot of the time the teachers say, he's a boy, he wants to be physical, he wants to run around, so it's fine, don't worry about it. And then as the years went by and I kept asking the question, are you sure? Are you sure? Is there something, you know, what are the warning signs here? But because they were different in gender, I think I just felt like I was encouraged to let it go a bit more. And then it got to the point where I was really sure that something wasn't quite right. So I wonder how that reflects with other people, and the kind of the assumptions that people make about boys, perhaps.
I think you're absolutely right that there are assumptions, and in some ways you are off to an advantage because you have the other two, you know, to compare your son to. If it's your first child or your only child, some people think, well, I just don't know, you know, what's going on. I don't know whether this is normal. I don't know whether it isn't normal. And schools are much better at picking up now on unexpected things going on and trying to get early diagnosis, which will help. Because early diagnosis, as you know, is incredibly important. There's so much that can be done to help. If there's something not going right in the learning, the child might have to take the scenic route rather than the most direct route. You know, they might have to learn in a slightly different way. But as for looking for signs, you know, with your own children, it's difficult because sometimes you don't want to over-imagine it. It's very difficult for us as parents, I think, to see our children objectively. That is quite hard, and you really don't know what's normal and what's not normal. But I think instinct is a very good thing. And if your instinct is, well, actually, this isn't quite right, you know, why is little so-and-so having tantrums? Why is she not able to settle down and read a book? Why does she keep throwing it out of the window? Is that normal? In some ways, some of it is developmental. So they'll develop at all different rates. My son didn't really speak much until he was 4 or 5, which is quite, and then didn't stop. And then it all, you know, it sort of evens out. But if the difficulties persist, and if despite the help the child's getting, they're still persisting, then there's usually, you know, something not quite right. I mean, with dyslexia, the typical signs people normally know about are letter reversals and difficulty reading and bizarre spellings, all sorts of things like that. But what they don't know is a very typical sign of dyslexia is having a poor working memory. And what your working memory is we all obviously learn through our senses. And when the information goes into your short-term memory, it has to be processed. So working memory is being able to hold some information in your brain, doing something with it, and then either sending it to the long-term memory or letting it go again. And that can be very affected by, it can be a weakness in dyslexia, a very common weakness, which of course will affect maths, because you try learning your times tables if you can't actually hold them in your head long enough to remember what you're doing.
I think that was one of the signs for us, because I think my son would read a word and then he would come across the same word in the next sentence and would have no clue what that word was. So yeah, definitely the recall thing, short and long term, was one of those really strong warning signs for us.
Exactly.
The interesting thing you were saying about development, something that you said about listening to your instincts, and I think that's probably what I ended up doing. But there were some things that I didn't have a clue about. For example, my son was a bottom shuffler, not a crawler, and so at that key developmental stage, he didn't learn. His eyes didn't learn to track properly when he was learning to crawl. So that meant that his eyes weren't coming together, and therefore affected his reading in later years. So things like that I didn't have a clue about. It is completely fascinating.
That's the very first thing. I mean, with the assessing, we always have to make sure that there are no physical reasons why a child hasn't learned to read or why they're not making their milestones. Really important to keep an eye to make sure they are seeing properly and make sure they're hearing properly. Once those then are out of the way. And what was also quite complicated is that things sometimes exist together. It's got it's called comorbidity, which sounds absolutely awful. I know, but it's very, very common to have a child who might have, I don't know, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and ADHD all going together. But I do try very much not to alarm parents, because most people do get through to adulthood, and they have the most amazing coping strategies. And lots of, my generation weren't diagnosed early, of course, at all, and have suffered and have actually got very, very low self-esteem because of it.
Absolutely. I was going to mention that.
Yeah, have amazing strategies for being able to cope. And a lot of people are highly successful because they've had to invent these strategies. I mean, like, Dyson with his Hoovers and all, there's lists of famous dyslexic people.
Winston Churchill's one, isn't he?
Yeah.
Jamie Oliver, there's so many. Yeah.
Oh, there's racing drivers, Leonardo da Vinci, Picasso, you go on and on and on. And I think it's because they've had to learn to use their brains differently. And then it becomes, there are books, dyslexia is a gift. And in some ways it can be, because it makes you different. You learn in a different way. But having said that, it can be quite an exhausting process for them, because they cannot go on this direct route. You have to work out different ways. I mean, that's what I always say to them. You can do it. You do have choices, but you may have to work twice as hard to get there. And they say, it's not fair. And I say, no, not fair at all.
No, but out of every negative, a positive, like you say. And so positive, the work that you're doing for so many, because I know that some people probably don't like the idea of having a label, but the relief, I think, that many children feel when somebody says, oh, there's nothing wrong, you're not silly, you're not stupid, that word.
There is a reason.
You've got this. And I know my son was just, a huge burden was lifted from his shoulders. And there are other people in my family who haven't had that diagnosis, which I think would have made a massive difference in their lives. So I applaud the work that you do. It's amazing. And the difference you make.
Really, really enjoy it. It's it sounds a bit trite to say it's a privilege to work with them, but I actually really like children, and I really like teenagers as well. They get such a bad press, but they're really funny. They brighten my day. They are, everything is fresh to them, and it's just lovely to work with them, really.
Brilliant. I'm just conscious of the time, but I could talk to you all day long.
I'm sure you can. I'm sure you'd go to sleep very quickly.
I think that some people might probably contact us and have questions. Would it be all right if they emailed?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So I will add my email address and pass any queries that you might have on to Penelope. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much.
And for learning about your faith and for the wonderful work that you do. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Penelope.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.